Welcome, dear listener. Tonight, as you allow your body to sink into rest, we will drift together into a world that feels far away, yet still lives within the roots of our collective memory. Imagine for a moment that the world around you has no humming electricity, no glowing screens, no engines, no rails. Beyond the borders of familiar towns lies a wilderness stretching endlessly, a land untamed and untouched, where every day is written not in ink, but in the footprints of those brave enough to walk it. This was the frontier, a place of silence and storms, of hunger and hope, of solitude and strength. It was here that survival was not guaranteed, but earned moment by moment, by hands both roughened and steady, by minds sharpened by necessity, and by hearts that had no choice but to trust in the land and in themselves. The people who ventured into this wilderness were not armed with modern comforts or conveniences. They did not carry endless supplies or ready-made tools. Instead, they carried knowledge, quiet, patient, hard, one knowledge passed down through stories, through practice, through long nights around campfires where children listened to their elders speak of how to live when the world offered no mercy. These were the forgotten survival skills, the wisdom that once kept frontiersmen and women alive, and though the world has changed, their lessons remain, hidden beneath the noise of our present lives. Picture, if you will, a dawn on the American frontier. The air is cool, touched by mist rising from the riverbanks. A man stirs from his bedroll of furs, his face weathered, his body lean from constant movement. Around him, the forest breathes. Birds call from hidden branches, water trickles over stones, and somewhere in the distance, the crack of a branch signals the steps of a deer. This man does not reach for a phone to check the time. He does not press a button to light a fire or pour water from a tap. Everything he needs must be coaxed from the earth. He sharpens his awareness, for here in the wilderness, even the simplest task is bound with danger and meaning. To survive another day, he must rely not on what he owns, but on what he knows. And what he knows has been carved into him by countless days of trial, countless nights of listening to the sounds of the wild. This is the world we step into now, slowly, gently, so that we may understand how survival was once achieved, and why those who lived it are still remembered as some of the strongest spirits to walk these lands. The frontier was both beautiful and merciless. Towering forests cast deep shadows that seemed endless, and at night, the stars stretched in a sky so vast it could swallow a person's sense of scale. The silence was profound, broken only by the murmur of wind in the trees or the distant cry of a wolf. There were no guides to mark the way, no maps detailed enough to rely upon, only the whispers of trails carved by animals and the instincts of those who had learned to see what most eyes would miss. The men and women of the frontier lived with constant awareness. They knew that a single mistake, a wrong step on loose rock, a night without shelter, a forgotten spark when the air was damp, could mean the difference between life and death. Yet in this uncertainty, there was also a profound connection to the earth. Every task became sacred, every choice deliberate, and every success, be it fire, water, food, or shelter, a triumph worth remembering. At the heart of frontier survival was a quiet resilience, a patience that came not from luxury, but from necessity. The frontiersmen knew that the wilderness could not be rushed, that nature moved in cycles of her own design. To live here was to listen, to watch, to adapt. It was to read the language of the earth, a language spoken not in words, but in signs, the way the grass bent in the wind, the way clouds gathered at the horizon, the way animal tracks curved toward water. These signs were the letters of a book that only the careful could read, and those who learned its pages found the difference between despair and survival. Imagine sitting by a campfire, its embers glowing low, as an elder speaks softly of these things to younger ears. He tells them how to watch the skies, how to find the north by the stars, how to move quietly so as not to startle game, how to make tools from stone, bone, or wood. The children listen. Why? Died, their futures tethered to the wisdom being passed down. In this way, knowledge was not written in books, but carried in memory, in repetition, in practice until it became second nature. As you listen now, imagine yourself in their place, stepping into a forest with no path but the one you make yourself. The air is cool, your breath visible in the morning light. You hear the whisper of leaves above, the creak of ancient branches, the far-off rush of water. Your body feels both small and strong, aware of how fragile it is, and yet how capable it can be when it must. In your pack there is no abundance, only a blade, perhaps some flint, a small pouch of dried food, and faith in the skills you carry. You are not moving into the wilderness for a few hours or a weekend. You are moving into it for a season, for a year, perhaps for a lifetime. Everything around you is both a threat and a gift, depending on how well you know how to use it. This is the frontier, and it welcomes you only if you respect it. These forgotten survival skills were not mere curiosities. They were the foundation of life itself. They formed the rhythm of days and nights, the boundaries of possibility. To modern ears, they may sound simple: how to make fire, how to find water, how to build shelter, but in the raw wilderness, simplicity was deceptive. Every action required patience, precision, and knowledge. One could not strike two stones carelessly and expect warmth. One could not wander aimlessly and expect to stumble upon a spring. Each task was deliberate, and in each task there was a kind of reverence. To survive was to participate in an unspoken covenant with nature, give respect, take only what is needed, and remain alert always. Those who forgot this balance often did not last long. The frontiersmen and women were not alone in their skills. Many had learned from the wisdom of indigenous peoples who had lived on the land long before settlers came. From them, they learned to identify edible plants, to prepare medicines from roots and bark, to track animals not only by sight but by sound and smell, to use the land's own rhythms as a guide. This blending of knowledge was essential. Without it, the newcomers would have perished far more quickly. The wilderness was vast and indifferent, yet those who listened to it, who respected its ways, found that it offered enough. The skills we speak of tonight are, in truth, not forgotten entirely, for they remain alive in traditions, in stories, in the quiet persistence of people who still walk close to the earth. But for most of us, they are distant, buried beneath the layers of comfort that modern life has given us. As you let your breathing slow and your mind drift deeper into this journey, imagine the patience of those who lived long before us. Imagine the stillness of their nights, when the fire burned low and shadows stretched like sentinels across the ground. Imagine the feel of rough hands gripping tools, of weary feet walking through forests, of eyes scanning horizons for signs of water or smoke. Every sense was heightened, every moment alive with possibility. In the silence of the frontier, the smallest sound could change everything. The snap of a twig could mean game nearby, or it could mean danger. The rustle of leaves might be a deer moving through the brush, or it might be the slow approach of a predator. To live in such a place was to be awake to the world in ways we rarely are now. And in that wakefulness, there was a certain kind of peace, a connection that went beyond fear, beyond struggle, into the rhythm of life itself. Tonight, as you close your eyes, think of those forgotten survival skills not as distant relics of a harsher time, but as threads that still connect us to the earth. Beneath the noise of modern machines and the rush of our days, the same earth waits, the same stars shine, the same rivers flow. The skills of the frontiersmen remind us that survival is not about wealth or abundance, but about patience, resourcefulness, and respect. They remind us that within each of us lies a quiet strength, ready to rise when needed, ready to endure. And as you drift toward sleep, may that quiet strength cradle you, steady and unbroken, carrying you into dreams as vast and endless as the frontier itself. In the world of the frontier, there was one skill that stood above many others, a skill so essential that without it, even the strongest man or woman could not last long. This was the ability to make fire without matches, an art as old as humanity, yet one that held particular significance in the wilderness. Fire was not a luxury, it was life itself. It meant warmth against the biting cold, protection against predators lurking just beyond the circle of light, the means to cook food, the comfort of companionship when solitude pressed too heavily. For the frontiersman, fire was a companion, a guardian, and a symbol of resilience. And yet, conjuring it was not as simple as striking a match, for such tools were rare, expensive, or altogether absent. Instead, fire had to be born carefully, coaxed from the meeting of flint and steel, or from the steady persistence of friction, a dance between patience and determination. Imagine the scene. The forest is damp from a night of rain, the air heavy with mist. A man kneels upon the earth, his hands steady, though his body shivers from the chill. He carries in his pouch a piece of flint, a shard sharp and unyielding, and a striker of steel worn smooth from countless uses. Beside him lies a small bundle of tinder, gathered with care from the driest scraps he could find, perhaps the shredded bark of cedar, perhaps the feathery threads of dried moss, perhaps the fibers of grass pulled and twisted until they resemble fine hair. He knows that without this preparation, no spark will survive. His movements are deliberate, practiced from years of necessity. He positions the flint, strikes the steel against it, and watches as tiny sparks leap forth, bright for the briefest moment before fading. Most die upon contact with the damp air, but one finds its way into the waiting nest of tinder. At once, the man leans close, cupping his hands to shield the glow. He breathes softly, feeding the fragile ember with patience. Slowly, the ember grows, glowing red, then orange until at last, a tongue of flame licks upward, fragile but alive. He adds small twigs, then larger ones, coaxing the fire into strength. Soon, the fire crackles, casting light against the shadows, sending warmth into his bones. In that moment, he is not merely a man in the wilderness, he is a keeper of life itself. The art of firemaking demanded more than tools, it demanded presence of mind. A careless hand could scatter sparks in vain. Impatience could suffocate an ember before it took breath. To succeed, one had to move with calm focus, with reverence for the process. It was a ritual as much as a task, reminding those who practiced it that survival was not given freely, but earned with patience. Many frontiersmen spoke of the satisfaction that came with seeing flames spring forth from nothing but stone and steel. It was a moment of triumph, a reminder that even in the face of cold and darkness, human will could create light. In truth, the fire was not just heat or light, it was hope. It was the reassurance that no matter how deep the forest, no matter how heavy the night, there was still a force within human hands that could push back against despair. There were times, of course, when even the most skilled found fire difficult to coax. Rain could drench the forest, leaving tinder damp and unyielding. Winds could scatter embers, smothering them before they grew. In such moments, the frontiersman's ingenuity was tested. Some carried char cloth, fabric burned until it turned black and delicate, ready to catch the smallest spark. Others knew where to seek dry tinder even in storms, beneath the bark of fallen trees, inside hollow logs, or deep within the recesses of evergreen branches. There were secrets in the forest that only careful eyes could find. The skill lay not only in striking sparks, but in knowing where to gather what was needed, how to protect the flame once it was born, and how to feed it until it grew strong. This was knowledge carried from one generation to the next, whispered by fathers to sons, by elders to the young, by weary travelers around glowing campfires at the end of long journeys. The fire, once alive, became the heart of the camp. Around it meals were prepared, around it stories were told. Its smoke rose into the night, carrying prayers, carrying memory, carrying the scent of survival into the endless sky. To sit by a fire was to sit in the company of ancestors, for fire had bound human communities since the dawn of time. On the frontier, where isolation was deep and silence vast, the fire offered not only warmth but companionship. It flickered and danced, speaking its own language of comfort, its crackles and pops a rhythm as soothing as any lullaby. Those who stared into its depths often found themselves drifting into thought, into memory, into dreams of distant homes or imagined futures. Fire was, in this way, both practical and spiritual, a bridge between body and soul. It is worth imagining what it felt like to face a night without fire. Darkness pressed in like a living force, cold creeping into bones, sounds of unseen animals echoing through the trees. Without fire, fear grew heavy, sleep was restless, and safety was fragile. But with fire, all was changed. The circle of light created a sanctuary, a fragile but powerful boundary between the human and the wild. Predators hesitated to cross it, insects kept their distance, and the mind found calm in its glow. Fire was not simply a tool of survival. It was a shield, a protector, a symbol of humanity's ability to carve out safety in an untamed world. No wonder frontiersmen cherished the skill to make it, for without it, the wilderness became unbearable. With it, they found the courage to endure. Some frontiersmen also mastered the bow drill or hand drill, ancient methods of friction fire making. These required even more patience. A spindle of wood was pressed into a baseboard, rotated quickly by hand or with the aid of a bow. The heat from the friction slowly carved a dark groove, and if done correctly, a small coal would form. This coal, fragile as dust, could be transferred into a nest of tinder, coaxed into flame by steady breath. Few could master this art easily, but those who did carried with them a skill that no storm could steal, for it required nothing but wood, determination, and time. Such methods connected them even more deeply to the earth, reminding them that fire was a gift, not a certainty. It was always earned, never assumed. Firemaking also carried with it lessons about resourcefulness. The frontiersman did not waste what he had. He learned to bank coals overnight, covering them with ash so they would smolder until morning, ready to be revived without striking new sparks. He learned to carry embers wrapped in dried fungus or bark, so that even as he traveled, he carried fire with him, a living thread that connected one camp to the next. To carry fire was to carry continuity, to carry the assurance that warmth and light would follow wherever he went. This practice, simple and ingenious, saved time, saved energy, and preserved life when conditions were harsh. Fire, then, was not only a skill to be made anew, but a treasure to be kept alive, tended like a fragile companion on the journey. The symbolism of fire ran deeper still. To many, it represented the will to survive, the spirit of endurance. It was no accident that campfires became places of gathering, of storytelling, of song. In the flickering glow, men and women spoke of their struggles, their triumphs, their dreams. They shared wisdom, they offered comfort, they found strength in one another's presence. The fire became a center, a reminder that even in the midst of hardship, there was warmth, there was light, there was community. For those traveling alone, the fire was a companion in solitude, a silent presence that reminded them they were not entirely forsaken. Its glow reached inward as much as outward, stirring a sense of calm, of continuity, of connection with all those who had ever sat by a fire before. As you allow these images to settle in your mind, imagine yourself in the wilderness, tasked with making fire. The ground is cold beneath your knees. Your hands are steady, though tired. You strike the steel against the flint, again and again, sparks leaping like tiny stars, most vanishing into the air. But one lands, catches, glows. You shield it, breathe upon it gently, as though encouraging a child to wake from sleep. The ember grows, glowing brighter, until it blossoms into flame. Relief floods through you, warmth begins to spread, and the world feels less dark, less vast, less indifferent. You have created light where there was none. You have kindled survival, and as the fire grows, so too does your strength. You lean back, watching the flames dance, listening to their soft music, and for a moment you feel a profound peace. This is the gift of fire, the forgotten art of survival, the quiet triumph of human persistence against the cold and the dark. In the wilderness of the frontier, every step carried meaning, and every mark upon the earth was part of a story waiting to be read. To the untrained eye, the forest floor seemed still, silent, unmarked. But to the frontiersmen, it was alive with messages, a vast manuscript written not in ink, but in tracks and signs, in broken branches and bent grasses, in the subtle language of the land itself. The ability to track was not just a skill, it was a lifeline. It meant the difference between hunger and a full belly, between walking into danger unprepared and moving through the world with awareness. Tracking turned the wilderness from a place of mystery into a place of meaning, where the smallest details revealed secrets invisible to others. It was as though the earth itself whispered, and only those who listened carefully could understand. Imagine a man rising at dawn, the air cool against his skin, the light of the rising sun filtering through the trees. He sets out quietly, his eyes scanning the ground. To most, the forest floor would appear chaotic. Fallen leaves, scattered stones, the tangled weave of roots and underbrush. But he sees differently. A faint depression in the soil tells him that a deer passed here in the night. The angle of the print, the depth of the heel, the slight disturbance of leaves, these speak to him of direction and speed. He kneels, touches the earth, feels the softness of the soil, and knows the track is fresh. He follows, moving slowly, carefully, his senses alert. Each step draws him deeper into the story. Here, the deer paused, perhaps to listen. There, it brushed against a bush, leaving a few strands of fur. The frontiersman is not merely walking. He is reading, line by line, a tale written by hooves upon the ground. Tracking was essential for hunting. To feed oneself and one's family, one had to know not only where animals were, but how they moved, how they thought, how they behaved in different seasons. A skilled tracker could read the difference between a deer searching for food and one fleeing in panic. He could see whether the tracks of a rabbit were fresh or days old, whether a bear had wandered through at dawn or weeks before. By learning to track, he gained more than food. He gained understanding. The forest was no longer an unknown expanse. It was alive, full of patterns, full of stories waiting to be discovered. Yet tracking was not only about animals. It was also about survival in a broader sense. Tracks could reveal the presence of other people, friends, strangers, or enemies. The shape of a boot print, the depth of its mark, the way it overlapped with other signs, these could tell a tracker how many had passed, how heavily laden they were, how quickly they moved, and how long ago they walked there. In a land where encounters could be dangerous, this knowledge was vital. It gave warning, it gave time to prepare, It gave the frontiersmen an edge in a world where misjudgment could mean disaster. To track well required not only sharp eyes, but also patience. The tracker did not rush. He moved slowly, often pausing to study the ground, to notice how one detail connected to another. A snapped twig here, a scuff mark there, a faint impression leading into grass, it all added to the picture. The tracker used every sense. He listened for the rustle of leaves, for distant movement. He smelled the air for the musky scent of animals or the smoke of a campfire. He watched the behavior of birds, whose sudden silence could reveal an intruder, whose flight could point to movement below. Tracking was an art of attention, a discipline of noticing what others ignored. In the stillness of the wilderness, the tracker became awake in ways few others could imagine. Picture, for a moment, the delicate signs left behind by a passing deer. Its hooves leave a heart-shaped print, narrow and pointed at the front, rounded at the back. The spacing between prints reveals its gait, whether it was walking, trotting, or bounding in alarm. If the soil is soft, the depth of the print shows its weight and the freshness of its passage. A single track, studied carefully, can tell the tracker not just that a deer was here, but what it was doing, where it might be heading, and how far away it is now. Multiply this by dozens of signs, and the tracker can weave a story that guides him through the forest, as though he were following a written path. It is a skill that seems like magic, yet it is nothing more than deep attention, honed through practice and necessity. For frontiersmen, this skill often meant life itself. Food was not stored in abundance. One could not simply open a cupboard or purchase supplies. Each day demanded effort, demanded awareness of where game could be found. Without the ability to track, one could wander the forest aimlessly, seeing nothing, finding nothing, returning hungry. With tracking, the wilderness became a provider, its secrets unlocked by careful eyes. The difference between hunger and nourishment was often measured in how well a man could read the land beneath his feet. Tracking also offered safety from predators, bears, wolves, mountain lions. These creatures roamed the frontier freely. To stumble upon one unprepared could be deadly, but the tracker read the signs of their presence long before the animal itself appeared. Large prints in the mud, claw marks on trees, scat left upon the trail, all these served as warnings. By recognizing them, the frontiersman could choose his path wisely, avoid danger, or prepare himself should an encounter be inevitable. In this way, tracking was not just a tool for seeking, but also for protecting, a constant shield against the unknown. The skill was also closely tied to intuition. Over time, a tracker developed a sense beyond logic, a feeling for where animals might be, for where paths might lead. This intuition was not mystical, but born of experience, of thousands of hours spent in the forest, watching, listening, learning. It was the kind of knowledge that seeped into the bones, that became second nature. To the tracker, the forest ceased to be a place of confusion. It became a familiar text, and though each page was new, its language was the same. He could read it because he had lived within it, because he had given it his attention day after day. Let us pause here and imagine ourselves walking in his place. The forest is hushed, the morning air cool and still. You step lightly, eyes scanning the ground. At first, you see only leaves, but then you notice one leaf pressed more deeply into the earth than the others, a faint outline where something heavy passed. You kneel, study the soil, and there it is, a hoof print, faint but clear. Your breath slows as you realize you are not alone. You rise, follow the track, each step revealing more. A broken twig points the way. A patch of grass bent in the same direction confirms it. You begin to see a path invisible to others, a path written in the language of movement. Soon, you feel as though you are walking not just through the forest, but through a story, each sign a word, each cluster of tracks a sentence. You are no longer wandering, You are following, guided by the whispers of the land. This practice also fostered humility. The tracker knew that he was not separate from the wilderness, but part of it. He was not above the animals he tracked, but connected to them, dependent upon them. Each track reminded him of his place within a greater web of life. Each sign taught him that survival was not about domination, but about balance, about understanding. This humility was as essential as the skill itself, for without respect, one could not endure the frontier for long. The land demanded reverence, and tracking was one of the ways it was given. Tracking could also be a source of wonder. Imagine coming upon the tracks of a bear with her cubs, the large prints accompanied by smaller ones. Imagine seeing the long stride of a wolf pack moving together across the snow. Imagine finding the delicate impressions of a rabbit weaving through underbrush, its path twisting and turning in frantic leaps. Each track was not just a sign of survival, but a glimpse into the lives of other creatures, a reminder that the wilderness was shared, that it pulsed with countless beings, each with its own story. For the tracker, these were not just signs to be used, but lives to be respected, mysteries to be marveled at, reminders that he was not alone. At night, when the fire burned low, trackers often told stories of their journeys. They spoke of following a deer for miles, of losing the trail and finding it again, of the thrill of success, of the lessons of failure. They spoke of the patience it required, the quiet, the stillness. And those who listened understood that tracking was more than a skill. It was a way of seeing, a way of being present in the world. It sharpened the senses, calmed the mind, and connected the spirit to the land. It was in many ways a meditation, a practice that demanded total attention, rewarded with both knowledge and sustenance. As you drift now deeper into rest, imagine yourself as such a tracker. Feel the earth beneath your feet, soft, steady, alive. Hear the faint crackle of leaves, the distant call of a bird. Smell the cool air, rich with the scent of pine. Let your eyes wander, noticing what others would ignore. The faint mark, the broken twig, the pattern hidden in plain sight. With each sign, you move forward, guided, connected, awake. The wilderness does not seem so vast, so indifferent, for now it speaks to you, and you can understand. This is the forgotten art of tracking, the survival skill that once kept frontiersmen alive. It is patience, it is awareness, it is respect. And as you carry these images into sleep, let them remind you that the world is full of quiet signs, waiting for those who slow down enough to see. On the frontier, one truth stood above all others: water was life. Without it, no man, no woman, no creature could endure for long. Food could be stretched, shelter could be improvised, even warmth could be endured in hardship. But without water, the body faltered quickly. The frontiersmen knew this well, and so one of their most vital survival skills was the ability to find water where none seemed to exist. It was a skill born of observation, of patience, and of an intimacy with the land that modern eyes often cannot fathom. To live upon the wilderness was to learn the hidden places where water whispered, to notice the signs that others missed, to trust that the earth, even in its harshness, still offered what was needed to sustain life. Imagine walking under the heavy sun across an open plain. The heat presses down, the air shimmers, the mouth grows dry. The land seems endless, empty, unforgiving. To wander here without knowing how to find water would be despair itself. But the skilled frontiersman does not panic. He studies the horizon, the patterns of plants, the movement of animals. He reads the landscape as though it were a map, one written not in ink, but in life itself. He knows that where the grass grows greener, where willows or cottonwoods cluster, where the ground dips gently into a hollow, there water may be waiting. Sometimes it lies upon the surface, clear and flowing. Sometimes it hides beneath, waiting to be coaxed forth with digging. The tracker of water becomes a reader of signs, for the earth speaks quietly, and only the attentive can hear. Animals were often guides. Birds flying low at dusk could reveal the location of water, for they traveled from their feeding grounds to rivers or ponds each evening. Bees, too, betrayed its presence, for they seldom ranged far from a source of moisture. The tracks of deer, pressed deep into mud, could lead to hidden springs. Even insects offered clues, their clusters often appearing near damp ground. The frontiersmen watched all these with care, piecing them together into certainty. To the untrained, it may have seemed guesswork, but to him, it was knowledge as precise as any compass. He had learned from long days of searching, from mistakes and small triumphs, from lessons passed on by those who came before. At times, water was hidden in the most unlikely places. Beneath the sandy beds of dry streams, one could dig shallow wells until moisture seeped up. In the hollows of rocks, rainwater sometimes lingered, trapped like a secret gift. Dew collected upon grass at dawn, and though small, it could be gathered by cloth and wrung out for a sip. Certain plants also held life, giving liquid: cacti in the deserts, vines in the forests, roots that yielded moisture when cut. These were not easy discoveries. They were earned through practice, through attentiveness, through the willingness to look deeper than the surface suggested. Each droplet carried immense value, each trickle of water a triumph. The frontiersmen also knew the dangers of water. Not all that glittered was safe. Stagnant pools could breed sickness. Clear streams could hide unseen dangers. They learned to judge water not only by its presence, but by its movement, by the health of the plants nearby, by the taste and smell. They boiled it when they could, filtered it through sand and cloth when they had no other choice. To drink recklessly was to risk illness, and illness in the wilderness was often fatal. So even as they rejoiced at finding water, they treated it with respect, mindful of both its blessing and its peril. Consider the patience this required. A man might spend hours searching, scanning the land, following faint clues, digging, waiting. He might fail once, twice, and yet try again, knowing that his very survival depended upon persistence. There was no room for despair, no time for surrender. Each step was measured, each attempt deliberate. And when at last the water came, a small trickle from beneath the sand, a hidden spring bubbling between rocks, a clear stream revealed beyond a ridge, the relief was profound. To drink deeply after such labor was not merely to quench thirst, but to feel renewed, restored, reconnected to life itself. That first sip was not just liquid, it was hope. Picture yourself now as one of them. The sun is high, your lips are dry, your strength is fading. You walk steadily, refusing to yield to panic. Ahead, you notice a cluster of green trees, taller and fuller than the rest. Their presence tells you what your body longs to hear. Water must be near. You move closer, scanning the ground, and there, a narrow depression, damp soil beneath the surface. You dig with your hands, slowly, patiently. The soil grows darker, wetter, until at last, a glimmer of water seeps forth. You wait, the small pool growing larger, clear enough to cup in your hands. You drink, and the coolness spreads through you, lifting the weight of exhaustion, reminding you that life persists. This is what it meant to find water on the frontier, to wrest survival from the earth itself, to turn observation into sustenance, to be rewarded for patience and faith. Water was more than survival, though. It was also a center of life. Camps were built near it, trails followed it, settlements grew upon its banks. To find water was to find community, to find safety, to find the possibility of growth. The rivers and streams of the frontier were highways of travel, carrying canoes, rafts, and memories. They were the sources of stories, of legends, of songs sung around fires at night. For the frontiersmen, water was not simply something to drink. It was a constant companion, shaping his path, guiding his choices, reminding him of both his dependence and his resilience. In the quiet of the night, by the glow of the fire, frontiersmen would speak of their searches for water. They would tell of the time they nearly perished for lack of it, of the spring they stumbled upon at the last moment, of the lessons the land had taught them. These stories were not told lightly. They carried the weight of gratitude, the awareness that water was never to be taken for granted. Each tale was a reminder that survival was not assured, that life was fragile, that every sip was a gift. And those who listened would carry that lesson forward, knowing that one day they too might need to rely on the same wisdom. Finding water also carried a spiritual dimension. Many felt that springs and rivers were sacred, gifts of the earth that deserved reverence. To drink was not only to survive, but to participate in something greater, to connect with the cycles of life that flowed endlessly across the land. The sound of water trickling over stones, the sight of sunlight glinting upon its surface, the feeling of coolness upon the skin, all these offered more than sustenance. They offered peace, reassurance, a reminder that the earth, even in its harshest moments, still held kindness within it. As you drift now toward rest, imagine the sound of a clear stream flowing gently over smooth stones. Imagine the feel of cool water upon your lips, easing thirst, soothing weariness. Imagine the relief of finding it after long hours of searching, the gratitude that fills your heart, the strength that returns to your body. Water is life, then as now, and the frontiersmen who learned to find it carried within them one of the most essential of all forgotten survival skills. To know where water hides, to coax it forth from the earth, to cherish it when found. This was wisdom beyond measure. And as you listen, may its lesson remind you that life, like water, is always present, always flowing, waiting to be found with patience and care. On the frontier, where the wilderness stretched endlessly in every direction, shelter was not a matter of comfort, but of survival. The open sky could be beautiful by day and terrifying by night, and the elements shifted without mercy. A sudden storm could sweep across the plains with sheets of rain, a bitter wind could rattle through the trees, and snow could fall thick and heavy in the mountains, cutting off the warmth of the sun. To endure these trials, frontiersmen had to know how to build with what the land offered. They carried no blueprints, no stores of lumber, no nails by the bucketful. They carried only their knowledge, their tools, and their will. Shelter was a shield, a sanctuary, and a reminder that even in the harshest of places, a small corner of safety could be carved from the wild. The first shelters were often the simplest, built quickly at the end of a long day's travel. A lean-to, for instance, could be fashioned from branches leaned against a fallen log or propped against a ridgepole between two trees. Covered with evergreen boughs, grass, or bark, it offered a barrier against rain and wind. It was not beautiful, nor was it permanent, but it gave enough protection to rest through the night. The frontiersmen knew that exhaustion was as dangerous as hunger or cold, and so even the most hurried structure could mean the difference between life and death. A lean-to was a promise that dawn would come, and with it another chance. In wooded regions, brush shelters were common. These were woven together from saplings, reeds, or branches, bent into arcs and layered with leaves, moss, or mud. The result was a dome-like space low to the ground, but warm and secure. The act of building such a shelter required patience, as each layer added not only insulation, but also a sense of calm. Inside, the frontiersmen could lie close to the earth, listening to the muffled sounds of the forest, feeling protected by the very materials the land provided. The walls might sway with the wind, the roof might leak under heavy rain, yet it was enough. Enough to rest, enough to survive, enough to remind him that nature was not only harsh, but also generous. For longer stays, more permanent shelters were required. With only an axe and determination, men cut logs from the forest and began to stack them, notching each piece so it locked firmly into place. A log cabin rose slowly, one layer at a time, square and sturdy. Between the cracks, moss, clay, or mud was packed tightly to keep out drafts. The roof might be made of split shingles or covered with bark and earth. Inside, a stone hearth became the heart of the home, its smoke curling upward through a chimney of rough rock. Though humble, such cabins could endure for years. They stood against snow, against storms, against time itself, and many became not just shelters but homes where families grew, where children laughed, where stories were told by firelight. To build a cabin was to declare permanence, to say, "Here I will endure." Shelters varied with the land. On the open prairie, with few trees to cut, sod houses rose from the very ground. Blocks of earth, thick with grass and roots, were cut and stacked like bricks. The result was a home of soil, cool in summer, warm in winter, silent against the wind. Though dim inside, and often damp, these sod houses provided a resilience unmatched by wood. They were, quite literally, pieces of the prairie itself, shaped by human hands into walls that resisted the endless sweep of storms. To enter such a house was to feel surrounded by the land, to be embraced by it, to share in its endurance. In mountains, caves and overhangs were often used. Where stone offered protection, men and women did not waste energy building anew. They cleared debris, built fires at the entrances, and lined the floors with branches or furs. In the silence of stone, they rested, listening to the echoes of their own breath. Such shelters carried an ancient weight, for caves had sheltered humans since time began. In those dark spaces, the frontiersmen felt both small and connected to something eternal. The mountain offered its strength, and in return, the traveler honored it with respect and care. Every shelter, no matter how small or grand, was a creation of necessity and ingenuity. A man could not simply wish for comfort. He had to earn it with sweat, with observation, with patience. He studied the wind to know where to build. He watched the slope of the land to avoid flooding. He positioned entrances to face away from storms. Each choice was deliberate, born of experience, taught by hardship. The land itself became the teacher, punishing mistakes with cold or wet, rewarding wisdom with warmth and rest. Over time, the frontiersmen learned not just how to build, but how to listen. Shelter was less about construction and more about harmony with place. Think of the feeling at the end of such labor. The body aches from cutting, from lifting, from weaving. Hands are raw, clothes damp with sweat. And then, at last, the shelter stands. It may be crooked, it may be rough, but it is there. A space to crawl into, to light a fire near, to lie down within. As the wind rattles outside, as rain patters against leaves, as snow falls heavy upon the roof, inside there is safety. Inside there is the chance to sleep, to dream, to recover. The frontiersman rests with gratitude, knowing that his effort has turned the wilderness into a protector rather than an enemy. Shelter was also deeply symbolic. It marked the line between chaos and order, between exposure and belonging. To raise a cabin, to shape a sod wall, to weave a roof of branches was to carve meaning into the landscape. It was a statement that humans, though small, could endure, could adapt, could find a place even in the vastest wilderness. Many frontiersmen spoke of their shelters with pride, not because they were grand, but because they were hard-won. They represented resilience, ingenuity, and the unshakable desire to live. As you imagine these shelters now, let your mind wander through them. Picture a lean-to under the trees, rain tapping softly on its roof of branches, firelight flickering at its entrance. Picture a brush shelter, earthy and warm, with the smell of moss and pine filling the air. Picture a log cabin, smoke rising from its chimney, snow piled gently against its walls, laughter echoing within. Picture a sod house on the prairie, silent against the roar of the wind, rooted deeply in the earth itself. Picture a cave in the mountains, the fire's glow reflecting upon stone, shadows dancing as the night deepens. Each is simple, each is humble, and yet each offers what every weary traveler seeks: a place to rest, a place to dream, a place to endure. On the frontier, survival was not about conquering the land, but about living with it, shaping what it gave into what was needed. Shelter was the clearest expression of this truth. It was a gift of time, of energy, of skill, but also of faith, the belief that the labor would hold, that the walls would stand, that the night would pass safely. And so, as you drift gently now, imagine yourself within such a shelter. Outside, the wilderness breathes, vast and untamed. Inside, you are safe, warm, protected. You close your eyes, listening to the sounds beyond the walls, the whisper of wind, the rustle of leaves, the distant call of an owl. Within your shelter, you are at peace. Within your shelter, you endure. Of all the skills that sustained the frontiersmen, there was one less visible than fire, less tangible than water, less solid than shelter. It was not something that could be held in the hand, nor built with tools, nor passed from one person to another in simple instruction. Yet it was the foundation upon which all other survival depended. It was patience, a stillness of spirit, an endurance of will, an ability to wait without despair and to persist without rushing. This was not merely a trait. It was a survival skill as real and necessary as striking sparks for a flame or cutting logs for a cabin. Without patience, no man or woman lasted long on the frontier, for the wilderness taught its lessons slowly, and only those who listened without haste could truly endure. The land itself moved at its own rhythm. Rivers carved their courses over centuries. Trees grew from saplings into towering giants over decades. Seasons shifted with a steady, unstoppable pace, answering to no clock, no urgency. To live in harmony with such a land required an adjustment of the human spirit. Those who tried to rush against it, who sought to force its rhythm into their own, found themselves broken by storms, by hunger, by exhaustion. But those who learned to wait, to match their heartbeat to the earth's slower pulse, discovered strength in patience. They saw that survival was not a single act of courage, but 1,000 small acts of endurance, repeated day after day, year after year. Hunting, for example, was an act of patience. The frontiersman might sit for hours in the stillness of dawn, waiting for the deer to appear at the edge of the clearing. His muscles ached, his stomach growled, his body longed for movement, yet he remained motionless. Every snap of a twig, every rustle of leaves could betray him. He had to quiet his own impatience, to breathe slowly, to blend into the silence. When at last the moment came, when the deer stepped into view, his patience was rewarded. The animal was food, clothing, life itself. Without patience, the hunt would fail. With it, he and those who depended on him could endure another day. Weather, too, tested patience. A sudden storm might trap travelers in their cabins for days. Snow might fall so heavily that roads vanished, trapping wagons until spring. In such times, there was nothing to do but wait. To grow restless, to push recklessly into the storm, was to invite disaster. The patient man stacked wood for the fire, mended his tools, told stories to his children, and trusted that the storm, like all things, would pass. He did not fight time. He let time carry him. He knew that the earth's tempests were stronger than any individual's will, and survival came not from defiance, but from endurance. The work of building also demanded patience. To raise a cabin required weeks of labor, each log cut, carried, and notched into place. To clear a field meant days of chopping, digging, and pulling stumps. To plant meant waiting through a long season before the first harvest came. There was no shortcut, no swift reward. Each step was slow, repetitive, often exhausting. Yet the patient spirit accepted this rhythm. Each stroke of the axe, each furrow plowed, each seed placed into the soil was a quiet act of faith. In time, the work bore fruit, but only for those willing to wait. Travel across the frontier was perhaps the greatest test of patience. Distances were vast, roads rough or non-existent, rivers wide and treacherous. A journey that might take a few hours today required weeks or months then. Wagons broke down, horses tired, weather delayed progress. The impatient might despair, but the patient measured the road one step at a time. Each mile passed was progress, each camp a small victory, each sunrise a reminder that the journey was still possible. To endure the endless horizon required more than strength. It required a calm acceptance that the road would unfold in its own time, that the destination was not simply a place, but the journey itself. Patience also shaped the inner life of the frontiersmen. Loneliness was common, the spaces were vast, and neighbors few. Mail might take months to arrive, news from the wider world even longer. In such silence, the impatient mind grew restless, anxious, despairing. But the patient mind found peace in solitude. It listened to the wind in the trees, the call of birds, the flow of rivers. It learned to find company in the land itself. To sit in stillness was not emptiness but fullness, a communion with the rhythms of the earth, a chance to know oneself in ways the crowded towns and cities never allowed. Patience transformed isolation into reflection, silence into strength. Stories told by survivors often spoke not of great battles or daring feats, but of waiting for a storm to pass, for game to appear, for crops to grow, for water to seep into a shallow well, waiting for dawn after a long night of fear, waiting for the strength to return after illness, waiting for loved ones to arrive across the plains. These moments were not dramatic, yet they were the essence of survival. For each hour endured, each day passed, each hardship accepted without breaking, life continued. And in that continuation lay victory. Patience was also closely tied to hope. To wait was to believe that what was needed would come. A man digging in dry ground for water had to believe that beneath the soil moisture waited. A woman tending a fragile crop had to believe that rain would fall, that the seeds would sprout. Without hope, patience became despair. With hope, patience became strength. This combination sustained the spirit, carrying it through the longest nights and the harshest winters. Patience whispered, "Endure a little longer, wait a little more, and life will return." The frontiersmen understood this deeply, though few spoke of it directly. They lived it instead. Their actions, their persistence, their steady rhythm all revealed the quiet wisdom of patience. It was not always easy. Frustration, fear, and exhaustion pressed against it constantly. But those who mastered it, who learned to hold steady when everything urged them to rush, were the ones who survived. Their patience was as much a shelter as the cabins they built, as much a nourishment as the food they hunted, as much a comfort as the fires they kindled. And so, as you listen now, imagine the patience of the frontier. Imagine sitting in silence by a campfire, watching the sparks rise slowly into the night sky. Imagine waiting at the edge of a meadow, watching shadows shift as the sun moves, listening for the faintest sound of life. Imagine snow falling steadily outside your cabin, piling higher and higher, while inside you sit quietly, warmed by the fire, trusting that spring will come. This is the patience that sustained them. This is the patience that turned survival into endurance. Patience is not only a frontier skill, it is a human skill, as vital today as it was then. Life still moves at its own rhythm, often slower than we wish. Storms still come, whether of weather or of spirit. Journeys still stretch long, whether across land or through our own struggles. To meet these with patience is to carry forward the wisdom of those who came before. Their forgotten survival skill is not forgotten at all. It waits quietly within us, ready to be remembered whenever life demands endurance. And as you drift now into rest, let patience guide you. Let it soften your breath, slow your heartbeat, quiet your thoughts. The frontier reminds us that nothing is rushed, that time unfolds as it must, that survival is not found in haste but in stillness. Close your eyes and imagine yourself in the wilderness, safe within the shelter of your own patience. Outside, the night stretches endlessly. Inside, you are calm, waiting, enduring. In patience, you find peace. In patience, you survive. In patience, you dream.